So I think we've heard today already about how important the proliferation controls and security controls incorporated in Resolution 1540 are, and we've got a terrific panel here to talk about them. We're starting a little bit late, so I'm going to try to be rigorous in keeping my panel members to 10 minutes or so there's some time for you to ask questions and for us to have some conversation. So we've got three panelists. Dana Perkins serves as an advisor in the Department of Health and Human Services on biosecurity issues now, but served as an expert on the 1540 committee and as part of the U.S. delegation to the Biological Weapons Convention and the Biological Weapons Convention review conferences. And I think often the issue of biological weapons doesn't get the level of attention that it deserves. We have now at the Belfer Center a new project starting up modeled on managing it, called Managing the Microbe, to try to begin correcting this imbalance. But I'm very glad that we have Dana here today to talk to us about the biological aspects. My friend Jim Walsh from down at MIT has been writing on non-proliferation for longer than either of us care to remember.
We'll say.
He has played, among other things, a quite important role, I think, in the United States on the negotiation of the JCPOA and its approval on Capitol Hill. Has also worked in great depth on North Korea. And in fact, a little over a decade ago, we had, it might have been in these rooms, I'm not sure, we had something like 20 North Korean officials stoutly denying that they had even an R&D program of uranium enrichment. And then we have, in addition to his current position at MIT, he's a frequent commentator on both television and radio, frequently writing articles, and used to be the executive director of the Managing the Atom project. We have Will Tobey, a close colleague of mine here at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Belfer Center. Will served on the National Security Council staff working on nuclear weapons issues in the last 3 Republican administrations, going all the way back to the Reagan administration, and in the second half of the last Bush administration, ran the Department of Energy's non-proliferation programs, which are about a $2 billion a year enterprise, including helping countries all over the world implement various aspects of their 1540 obligations. But perhaps more importantly, while on the NSC staff, Will was one of the initial drafters of the initial drafts of the resolution. So I will turn it over. We haven't actually discussed who should go first, but I think I'll go in the direction that I did the introductions in. So I will turn it over to Dana. I'll ask each of them to keep to about 10 minutes. Dana, it's up to you.
Thank you, Matt. I would like to start by thanking Stimson Center for inviting me here and to Harvard University for hosting this. Before I start, I want to say I'm originally from Romania, even though I represent the United States and I work for U.S. government, but I know many people are wondering about my accent, so it's from Romania. So I will offer some thoughts on the topic of this panel from my perspective as someone who transitioned from bench science at the bench to science policy, and also in my capacity as a former member of the 1540 committee group of experts. And as Matt said, I currently work for the US government, but I'm here in my personal capacity, so I'm telling you this as a disclaimer that my whatever I say may or may not coincide with the US government policy, and that keeps me out of trouble because I can provide some controversial thoughts and food for thought items here. I would like to start with very strong statement that I personally believe that Resolution 1540 is the absolute cornerstone of WMD non-proliferation efforts in the 21st century. Since the time the relevant treaties on nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons came into force, the political, technological, and social realities have changed so much that the traditional focus on countering WMD threats emanating from states no longer hold stage. And these WMD treaties were still striving to find their footing to deal with these new emerging threats of terrorists developing, using weapons of mass destruction. And that's where Resolution 1540 actually, I think, filled the niche by complementing and reinforcing this nuclear, chemical, chemical and biological weapons treaties by establishing obligations on all states, regardless of their treaty membership, to stem the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, biological weapons and their means of delivery, and also securing related materials. In my opinion, and here I start, remember the disclaimer I said at the beginning, the risk of terrorist organizations actually obtaining a nuclear, chemical, and biological weapon is low. However, that such a risk does exist with if such a group receives help from a state. However, terrorists or would-be criminals would not shy away from perpetrating terrorist attacks, releasing radioactive, chemical, or biological materials. And here lies, in my opinion, the greatest value added of Resolution 1540 and its monitoring and assistance processes, and also its biggest challenge: how to secure the sensitive dual-use materials, how to achieve the right balance between safety and security on one side, and issues concern other issues like not impeding scientific freedom and technological progress. That's one issue. Another issue I would like to bring up is that, as you know, the 1540 Committee and its group of experts are doing a tremendous job, outstanding job of monitoring the implementation of Resolution 1540 worldwide. Well, one area that is not monitored by the committee is the effectiveness of these national measures. Currently we don't have in our toolkit a set of key performance indicators to see how effective are the states' WMD non-proliferation strategies, their operational effectiveness. What is the gap between the targeted and actual performance? Basically, what I'm trying to say right now is that we don't have a framework for measuring accomplishments in this area. So here's some food for thought in this area. At the end of 2013, in December 2013, actually, the United States sent a national report to the 1540 Committee saying that we have national measures to implement every obligations of Resolution 1540, including all recommended activities. Shortly after, for the next 2 years, we are confronted with a string of laboratory incidents, including finding unaccounted smallpox vials on the campus of National Institute of Health, inappropriately inactivated anthrax and Ebola samples at CDC that were sent to laboratories not equipped to handle such samples, or the inadvertent shipment of anthrax by Department of Defense to a score of laboratories across US and abroad. So, because of those incidents, the White House, National Security Council, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy directed all federal departments of agency to undertake a comprehensive review and the underlying causes of these incidents, and provide recommendations to strengthen the overall biosafety and biosecurity in the United States. Through the Federal Expert Security Advisory Panel, of which I'm a member, and the Fast Track Action Committee on Select Agent Regulations, we actually undertook this comprehensive review informed by non-governmental feedback from industry, academia, and professional organizations. And we came up with a set of recommendations and measures that we are in the process of implementing right now. Most of them, the majority of those measures actually are with regard to the security of biological materials directly relevant to Resolution 1540. One of the lessons learned from this review, though, is that when it comes to the security of biological materials, you cannot rely solely on laws and regulations. You need to apply the so-called soft or smart measures, and I was happy to hear the word culture when the students talked earlier. We realized that we also need measures to strengthen the culture of biosafety, biosecurity, and responsible conduct of science. Nowadays, I mean, as you all know, and I'm preaching to the choir here, the international peace and security system is challenged nowadays, as we've heard from previous speakers, by evolving proliferation threats, diffusion of technologies through illicit networks, or the threat of chem-bio or ADNU terrorism. In these conditions, I think we also need to be more determined and allocate more resources to developing human capital through training and education. Scientists in particular are called to provide advice to government policymakers on these issues at the nexus of science and policy, including WMD, non-proliferation, and counterterrorism. And think of it, scientists also have been involved in planning or perpetrating terrorist attacks or misuse of science and technology. So I think this essay contest is a particularly important opportunity to raise the awareness of the younger generation on international norms on chemical and biological welfare, and also about our collective responsibility to prevent the misuse of science and technology. And just to conclude, and I found some very interesting nuggets in the essays I reviewed as a judge. We also need innovative, my last thought here. We also need innovative training and education approaches. We have to go beyond PowerPoint lectures. We need gaming and simulation and more interactive ways to learn about WMD non-proliferation. And I think all of these training and education initiatives should strive to impart knowledge and skills to individuals to work for or with governments to implement concrete non-proliferation and counterterrorism measures, but also more importantly to foster that responsive attitude toward current and future security threats. Thank you.
Jim, you're up.
Alrighty. Do I need are you recording this? Can I speak without a microphone? Or do you want me to use the microphone? Use the microphone. I do what I'm told. Yes, it is. Okay. Well, I want to begin by thanking Deborah and the Stimson Center and my good friends here at Belfer for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you. More importantly, though, I mean, I love them. They're great. But more importantly, I'm really happy to be here with you. I'm really proud of you. It makes me happy. It brings me joy to think that there are people substantially younger than me that have taken up this issue and that will carry the work forward. And contrary to everything you hear in academia, emotion is important. It's not all logic and analysis, and at least for our work, all grim scenarios, the burdens of feeling like you have to keep trudging along to save the world. That's not a healthy emotional stance. So how is it that we should feel about this project that we have? And I would say, without minimizing the challenges and the dangers, we don't have to do that, but I think it would also be a mistake not to recognize the success we've had, and for you to see your journey as part of an unfolding and remarkable and completely surprising story of success. Years ago, at the beginning, decades ago, at the beginning of the nuclear age, when you read the archives, you notice that all the experts, all the Department of Defense, the State Department, the academics, all expected nuclear weapons to spread like wildfire, predicting as many as 40 nuclear weapon states. And that did not happen. Matt and I disagree a little bit about how to characterize this, but I am of the mind that when you chart the spread of nuclear weapons, and my remarks will focus primarily on nuclear weapons, it's really been one of the greatest success stories of the 20th century, where really since the 1960s, fewer and fewer countries have chosen to join the nuclear weapons club. That is a great victory that people do not understand. And I think emotionally, it's helpful to know that yes, this is a winnable task ahead of us. We are not there yet, but we have instruments that our fathers and our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers would never have expected was possible, whether it's particularly in the area of safeguards, but even in the political commitments that states are making, the ways in which they give up their sovereignty would have been completely unexpected in the 1950s. So I think there's reason to be hopeful, and you're also a reason to be hopeful, and I very much appreciate that. Let me talk for a minute about 1540 in particular, and two aspects of it that strike me. I think it's important, and at least some of its importance, I'm sure I'm leaving things out. Part of it is legal. So it is important to have a Chapter 7 authority on the books that's in place, that when bad things happen, the Security Council can turn to without having to try to litigate or negotiate a resolution in order to have the authority in order to be able to respond. And moreover, this is the first resolution of its kind that has really broad enough in scope that it includes the often neglected areas, because nuclear always gets the attention, but having radiological and chemical, biological all together in one resolution is very important. But I think it's not where the center of gravity is. The center of gravity is less with the legal and more with the nature of policy and politics. We have lots of UN resolutions, and some of them are followed and some of them aren't. Having a resolution is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for producing an international outcome. I mean, I've been doing a lot of work on Resolution 2270, the one passed in March on sanctions imposed on North Korea. Now, those North Korean sanctions they've been repeatedly passed. There are obligations on all member states. There's a special committee that gets reported to. There's a UN panel of experts that names and shames those who follow through on their obligations. But it is tough sledding. It's not all about the language in the resolution. How is it that we get progress? It's really a question of politics and not legality. why is it that any state would spend time and effort, especially smaller states, that are unlikely, at least in their minds, we're already talking about a low-risk, high-consequence events, which governments suck at, right? They deal with what is happening tomorrow or what just happened on Twitter. They're not thinking about low probability, high-consequence events. They're not built for that. So why in the world would they care or put real resources or time and attention? Well, I would suggest to you that that only happens when there are domestic constituencies that think it's important. So having an international body like you are means that there are people in more countries that may over time grow and give this, let those roots take hold and provide governments reasons and expertise for wanting to carry out their obligations. I think we rely a lot on lecturing and shaming and naming, and that can be effective, but that only gets you so far. And that's true, I'm sure, of your parents and of your siblings. It helps, but it doesn't bring forth the full-throated commitment that leads to sustainable change. And so I think often the U.S. emphasizes coercion and moralizing, and again, that can be quite helpful, but it's insufficient by itself, and it is often counterproductive. If we are trying to create political commitment on the part of individual states to carry out their actions, because only they can do that. The U.S. can't do it for them. And so I think we have to talk and go beyond moralizing and coercion and talk about incentives and talk about political reciprocity. Countries get tired of the U.S. constantly asking them to do more and more on the nonproliferation front when they don't see that they're getting anything for it. There has to be something in it for them. And they have to see their role as sovereign states to be more than just administrators executing the plans of the great powers. There has to be a moral or a cultural or a political reason why this is important to. So I think we need to spend more time. I think the language in the resolution is terrific. I think it's, as I said, necessary, but we need to spend more time thinking about how we create a political consensus where people want to bear costs in order to carry out their obligations. And I think when we look at the other parts of the regime, we see that that's how that's played out, in particular with the NPT, where the non-aligned states and others feel like every new iteration of safeguards agreements means they're supposed to sign up and do what they're supposed to do, but they don't feel like they're getting what they need to get out of this. And so I welcome the international character of this group, and I hope that you're going to be able to think in new and innovative ways that your predecessors have found difficult to do, and that we can look at this and develop ways of talking about it and thinking about it that allow sovereign states to see that they're part of the solution, an integral part of the solution, which they see themselves as being part of a great project which they benefit from. And I hope you'll take up that cause and continue the record of great success we've had in this area. It hasn't been overnight, but we haven't blown ourselves up, and the number of countries that are getting these things has really receded. So I'm looking to you to finish the job, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Having just taught a class based on one of my favorite of Jim's writings on the subject, I don't think we actually disagree very much on on the causes or the realities of the success. But in any case, I'd like to turn now to Will Toby.
Well, first of all, congratulations to everybody involved in this project, but particularly the authors of the essays. I think the creativity, analytic rigor, and enthusiasm demonstrated was truly impressive. And like Jim, I take heart for the future. Hopefully you will finish the job that we've worked so imperfectly at so far, even though I do share your optimism. The topic that we were given, preventing WMD proliferation, challenges and potential solutions, a pretty broad one. Too broad for me for 10 minutes. So I'm going to narrow my comments considerably to talk about UN Security Council Resolution 1540 and also particularly the nuclear aspects of that. As originally conceived, the resolution had two purposes. The first was legalistic, and the second was lofty. The legalistic goal was to fill a lacuna left by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was premised on the assumption that nuclear weapons are the province of states, and thus limited its prohibitions to actions by states. The lofty goal was to place prohibition in a category of universally abhorred activities, then occupied, well, we thought about slavery and piracy. Nikita Smitovich's analogy to cannibalism is even more vivid, although I would argue that slavery and piracy are the right way to think about it, because cannibalism can be outlawed within a family or a state, but to get rid of piracy or slavery, you needed cooperation by nations. While this analogy evokes a hoary history of William Wilberforce and the British sailing navy, it's important to keep some perspective. And while universal condemnation of slavery and piracy is generally accepted, it's important to remember that human trafficking and buccaneering exist even today. So a resolution that's a mere 12 years old can't really be expected to achieve perfection in its ends, given how long it's taken to achieve these other goals that we thought were analogous. Moreover, the resolution and its implementing committee have achieved impressive successes. Many states have enacted new laws and regulations. Much training and assistance has been offered and received. And a second comprehensive review is now underway, and I'm hopeful that that will lead to even better implementation. Nonetheless, a principle of nuclear security is that if we don't pursue continuous improvement, complacency will seep into our actions, which is the enemy of effective security. So I'll offer just a single observation for improvement in terms of how the committee operates. The 1540 Committee and the International Atomic Energy Agency should significantly increase information sharing and learn lessons from and make more effective the work of each body. Let me explain by talking about how their work differs in four important respects. The Non-Proliferation Treaty and the International Atomic Energy Agency. First, the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the International Atomic Energy Agency focus on actions of states, whereas the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 focused on prevention of actions by non-state actors. Obviously, the actions of states are relevant, but it was the non-state actors that were key. Second, the IAEA's work is premised upon, although not devoted exclusively to, control of source material, fissile material. Whereas the UN Security Council Resolution 1540 primarily, although not exclusively, focuses on the means of making such materials, as well as other biological, chemical, and means of delivery. Third, the IAEA's work is limited to civil materials, whereas UN Security Council Resolution 1540 applies to all material, civil and military. Fourth, the IAEA is responsible for verifying compliance with safeguards agreements and ultimately the Non-Proliferation Treaty, whereas the 1540 Committee is neither a sanctions committee nor a means to investigate or prosecute alleged violations of non-proliferation allocations. So these are important differences. And I think those differences mean that for the two bodies to work together is essential. And it's particularly essential because there's an important intersection in their work that's created not by either body, but by those who would proliferate. All of the major publicly identified non-state proliferation actors had participated in state-run proliferation procurement programs. All that I'm aware of anyway. My colleagues might know of others. A concrete example might help finish off the point. Visitors to North Korea's enrichment program have observed that the equipment present there is modern and originated outside of North Korea, probably in states that opposed North Korea's nuclear weapons program. So this was not a matter of voluntary transfer by states to proliferate. Almost, by definition, non-state actors must have been involved. The IAEA routinely examines procurement information. So what lessons are there in Vienna about how this occurred that could improve the work in New York? Conversely, what has the committee, the 1540 committee, learned in sifting through a great volume of data that could help inform the IAEA and look at vulnerabilities in its monitoring processes? Both are UN bodies, so this would not require crossing certain boundaries, legal boundaries that might otherwise be present. I believe also it would not require breaking safeguards confidentiality, because much of the procurement data is gleaned external to the member states' submissions. And I would argue, third, to a degree, the cooperation is already occurring. For example, there's cooperation on security training provided by the IAEA, which then becomes part of the 1540 reporting and implementation. But I would argue that the extent of the cooperation could be much greater. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of the panelists for A, interesting remarks, and B, staying admirably on time. And I want to join them in both thanking Deborah Decker and her colleagues in putting this amazing contest together, and in congratulating all of you who participated. It is heartening to see a new generation so ably putting their shoulders to the wheel of non-proliferation. So I look forward to working with many of you in the future. So we are now open for questions and discussion. Thoughts?
Can I ask the first question? If I can figure out how to put the mic on.
Absolutely.
Well,
You are our fearless leader.
So when we were formulating this question, and maybe the experts in the room might be able to help. The question was whether to include radiological in the definition, and technically it's not in the resolution, but it had been in the last matrix a footnote, and I don't think it's in the footnote anymore. And so, on the other hand, I took part in the Nuclear Security Summit and spoke at the Industry Summit, and there, the last thing that Obama did is he had a closed meeting with the different leaders of governments, and they did a simulation that was radiological. So what gives? What do you think 1540, I don't know what the official take on that is, and maybe the next panel can tell us on the radiological aspects of it. And do you think to what extent that should be included?
I think logically it ought to be included. It is one of the things terrorists might do, and it's not just spreading radiological sources with dirty bombs, it's also potentially sabotage of major facilities. And as Dana mentioned, it's not just nuclear or radiological facilities, it could be a chemical facility, it could be a biological facility, it could be sabotaged. However, it's not obvious to me that the politics will sustain major expansions of the requirements in 1540. Maybe we will hear about that more in the next panel. I don't know.
There also, as a microbiologist, I have many opinions on nuclear and radiological weapons. But as you know, the footnote on Resolution 1540 talks about nuclear weapons-related materials, and there are, however, national reports that I viewed when I was an expert. Many countries actually report on securing radioactive sources. Mm-hmm. They talk about compliance with the IA Code of Conduct. So you have that additional reporting even if it's not required per se in the resolution. And many, I was a member of the US delegation to the open consultation, the comprehensive review. Many statements I heard in that forum actually from states were calling or addressing the security of radioactive sources as well.
Thank you.
I'd just say, when we were drafting the resolution, we thought about including it, but ultimately decided that it was going to be a sufficiently close-run thing as to whether this would pass or not, that we didn't want to bite off any more than we had to, for better or for worse.
Just very briefly, as luck would have it, I was at the State Department yesterday giving a talk on nuclear terrorism, and I focused almost all of it on, improvised nuclear devices and that sort of thing, and really didn't talk about radiological, although I was prepared for it, just not a lot of time. And the State Department people responded that they wanted to hear about radiological because that was a concern of some of their partner governments. So there is something going on with some of them. You asked the broader question, should it be included? I think the answer is yes, with the recognition that we're dealing with a completely different animal here. This is just a very, very different thing. Long time ago when I was here at Belfer, we had a working group on radiological weapons. And you all already know this, but in most judgments, at least with radiological weapons as opposed to events, more people would die from the conventional explosive than they would die from the exposure to radiation. As a policy problem, it seems to me it's much more one of response than prevention because we are swimming. I mean, it's hard enough to lock down HEU and PU and plutonium. It is probably impossible to lock down all the things that are radioactive and used by industry in the world. That doesn't mean you can't have priorities, but it is terrorism in the classic sense that its intention is really to disproportionately cause fear. And so I think it's really policymaking really needs to focus about having credible sources of information that can respond, help people be able to make a transition, those sort of dealing with those who face not only physical but psychological injuries. Radiation is this funny thing. On the one hand, everyone's scared of it. On the other, because they can't see it. On the other hand, because they can't see it, getting back to routine normal in the wake of a in the wake of a terror accident might actually be easier. So I think, when it comes to weapons-related terrorism, it's all about prevention. And when it's radiological, it's mostly, but not entirely, about having really great response. But you don't do that on the fly in the middle of in the aftermath of an attack. I also want to say, now that I have the microphone, that I thought my co-panelists were terrific. I thought they both really gave great presentations in a really short amount of time, and I really learned from them.
Other
Michael.
Former. Yeah, as a former expert to Dana, because who is a former expert. This was also a query we had in around 2007 to 11. One, the preamble of 1540 refers to the IAEA Code of Conduct on the safety and security of radioactive substances. And we also had comment from many states who said, well, we don't have anything nuclear, go away, this doesn't concern us. But they did have radioactive things, and so it's almost as a de facto inclusion. The states would report on ionization measures and things like that. So we would not discourage reporting of radioactive, and maybe you say, oh, well, you can always do radioactive, you can report it. So we did it in a practical sense rather than in a resolution way.
Other ideas, thoughts, questions? Question here, Michael.
Yes, hi, I'm Michael Rosenthal, a present expert. Just some comments and maybe a question. One, to follow up on Olivia's point. One of the things that I've learned while I've been doing some of the work in New York is that whereas I think only 60 countries have nuclear material, safeguarded nuclear material, almost all countries have radioactive sources that they use in industry and medicine. And as a result, almost all, I shouldn't say almost all, many more countries have nuclear-related regulation that's to govern public health and safety in the area of radioactive material. And as far as I know, no state has regulations to govern public health and safety with respect to radioactive material that doesn't also cover nuclear material. And so I won't speak to the question about whether radiological material should or shouldn't be within the resolution, but within an odd way, for completely different reasons than 1540, it is regulated around the world. And I think that's a plus without answering the question about whether it should be or shouldn't be. And of course, also many more countries are follow the code of conduct because they need to do so to get radioactive sources than are using nuclear material in any certainly fuel cycle related activity. So there's a positive thing out there which is compatible with and consistent with 1540, even though it's outside the scope of 1540. And I guess if I were thinking about governing radioactive sources, I would say to the U.S., doctor, heal thyself. Not worrying so much about worldwide coverage of 1540. One other observation, it has to do with Jim Walsh's comment about political attitudes towards 1540. I've been looking at that a little bit recently in terms of the open consultations, and I came across an instance in which back in, 2004 and 5, shortly after the resolution was adopted, a leading member of the non-aligned movement said, "You can't legislate for us. Our government will not allow that." The same government 3 months ago said, "We would like to join others who have called for the full implementation of Resolution 1540, and we're, roughly speaking, 100% behind it." So that political divide, I don't think exists anymore. And a question, though, I'll put to the group, and that is, one of the other of the observations I would make, and it's perhaps true of the IAEA more on balance than maybe some other organizations, but 1540 isn't within the mandate explicitly, of course, of any international organization except the United Nations. And I wondered whether you have any thoughts about how could you get the World Health Organization or the IAEA or other organizations who have not kind of vigorously and enthusiastically joined in the effort to assist their member states in implementing 1540. I don't want to pick on IAEA, and there are actually some real leaders in the area of Interpol, I think, in the WCO, that have vigorously worked to help their member states implement 1540 regulations, but not everybody. Thank you.
Dana.
As someone who actually conducted extensive outreach to WHO to join as an assistance provider and is now on the list of assistance providers with 5040 committee, I can say that the WHO didn't sign up until 2013 because they didn't believe in the value of resolution 1540. It's just they were not explained properly or properly engaged in order for them to sign up to the network, if I may say so, because the whole UN bureaucracy has to be explained that it doesn't matter you do the work, if you don't send the letter to the committee, if you don't do all of those, all that paperwork, it doesn't really matter. You have to be registered as a provider, quotation marks. But in the same time, this situation, I mean, WHO does amazing work on biosafety and biosecurity around the world. It is not called, this work is for implementing Resolution 5040. All of the actions that I told you that we are implementing now in the United States for strengthening biosafety and biosecurity in the United States, they are not called measures toward strengthening implementation of Resolution 5040 in the US. But they are directly related if you look at each measure we are taking. We don't have a law like we had for Biological Weapons Convention ratification to say, now that Resolution 1540 was adopted, this is the law in the United States that implemented. No, but you have to look at all of those measures that are particularly directed toward non-proliferation, securing materials, and see how they match the various measures of Resolution 5040. And that applies to international organization also at national level, and looking from the US perspective.
I'd like to hear a question from a student. Any of the students have any questions? Go ahead.
I'll just stay seated since I'm right in the middle. So my question is relating to some of the countries that have either yet to implement or have done so more so in name than their actions. In some of my research, I came across the phrase, and I don't remember where it was actually from, but the concept that their weapons of mass destruction are more so small arms, because those are the ones that are actually affecting their countries. And so I guess my question is almost a two-part. How would you see, like, what are the best methods in your opinion to outreach to these countries to make their implementation, or what the steps that they actually do end up taking, being the most effective? Where do we place the priority, since the Resolution 1540 doesn't have priority on each step? It's a very long list of things. And additionally, should the priority, I guess, be placed on the universal and in getting even these countries that maybe don't have as many of these sources, or other efforts globally that can possibly counteract some of these gaps? Thank you.
Anybody want to take that one on?
Yeah, okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
I think it's a great question, and I think it raises one of the themes that I talked about before, and I'm going to reference back. I appreciate the story about the country that spoke for the non-aligned movement and that is now a vigorous supporter. I think that's awesome. I don't think it disproves the general political proposition which is your question. How is it that when states have their own problems, how can we get them to want to work on our problems when they have other problems that they care about? Now, there's nothing in 1540 that would allow you to address small arms, but nevertheless, within the structure of the international system, the actions are taken out by individual sovereign governments. So there's nothing that prevents the United States or France or Germany or whoever to go to some state and say, I'm just making this up out of whole cloth, but I'm using it as an example, to say, I hear you, this is a bigger security threat to you. What can we do to help you that will allow you to help us? I think that's the basic principle of international cooperation. That's going to have, I still see political, it's not so much, a lot of the non-aligned movement, there's posturing and there's competition within the non-aligned movement to be the head of the non-aligned movement. I use that only as an illustration. All you have to do is go to any NPT review conference to hear complaints about what some perceive as increasing obligations on them to carry out new stuff, and they don't feel like they're getting anything for it. So I think whether it's organizations, like in the last question, how do we motivate an organization? How do you motivate a person? How do you motivate a government? You have to see the problem from where they are, find something they care about, and then engage in some sort of reciprocity where they get satisfaction about something that's important to them. Sometimes those are cross-domain negotiations. Sometimes they're one for one. But that's not to say that it's all holding hands and lovey-dovey. I mean, leverage matters, coercion matters, all these things matter. So you need a variety of tools and approaches. And in terms of universality, we all have to cheat on that one. And so the reality is we set priorities that are logical, states with metric tons of nuclear material, we probably should start with those. While also, being committed to universality. So we just have to do both at the same time. So keep pedaling as fast as we can.
Well, Dana was the first one and I've got something to say
I'll
too.
be
So
short.
Dana, go ahead, and then Will, and then I'll.
I just wanted to say, in the outreach, either as an expert or on behalf of U.S. government, I heard from many countries. On bio, we don't have biological weapons. Why do I care about 1540? Right? Our interest is to respond to a public health emergency, to comply with the international health regulations. What's the benefit of 1540 in all of this? So I think it's very important for each sector to see where is the overlap and synergy with other international agreements and frameworks and so on. In bio, it was with building capacities under international health regulations. You also have that prevention element built into those capabilities and in biosafety, biosecurity, there is a straight overlap between biosafety, biosecurity under international health regulations, requirements under the Biological Weapons Convention, and now under the Global Health Security Agenda. But you have to know all of that, and in many, the problem I see in many countries is that different people work on different treaties, agreements, and so on, and don't talk to each other at the national level. So Ministry of Health will work on international health regulation, but 1540 is under Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they don't talk to each other. So that is one of the major problems I've seen in other
Which makes those cross-domain partnerships and negotiations that Jim was talking about close to impossible, but they're very difficult.
I was actually just going to observe that the Walsh principle of international relations can apply to the previous question.
I like that phrase, by the way.
With respect to the IAEA and the 1540 committee. So my colleague Matt Bunn yesterday quoted former Director General Hans Blix as saying that he can assure non-diversion of material as long as he had three things: access to facilities, access to material, and access to the Security Council. Well, the 1540 committee has access to the Security Council. The 1540 committee also has information that I believe would be helpful for the IAEA to do its duty, just as they have information that would be helpful for the 1540 committee. That's why I urge there to be greater cooperation.
So I just wanted to offer a little bit of a shout out to work that the Stimson Center has been doing for years now on this general idea that, countries have priorities of their own. They want to feed their people, provide medical care, etc. And so if you can structure help with 1540 obligations in a way that it also helps deal with some problem that the country thinks is a priority, then you're much more likely to get somewhere. So, maybe the assistance to a customs organization also helps that customs organization deal with drug smuggling or contraband cigarettes that actually is a major concern of many customs organizations because it's a large part of how they finance themselves. People evading the taxes on cigarette transfers. And there are a variety of other things of that kind. So if being creative and innovative and thinking about ways that helping with one thing, maybe if you broaden it out a little bit, can help with something else that the country actually cares about, I think is one very important way to go, and it's something the Stimson Center has been doing. Now, I know that Deborah wants me to stop, but I also know that Adrian's been wanting to ask something, so I'm going to give Adrian one last question.
Just a quick question. Yeah, thank you very much. So very briefly, my question turns around the issue of getting funding from state members for the sake of resolution 1540. So I'm thinking about an alternative scenario. So do we have to wait till a first radiological or chemical homemade weapon will be used to reach political consensus and achieve, of course, the most important thing, international financial commitment? Or even worse, we will have to wait till an attack will happen within the European Union or the territory of one of the Security Council members to make it happen.
Well, if we're waiting for the first attack by terrorists with weapons of mass destruction, we should have started a while ago. There were the nerve gas attacks in the Tokyo subways, not a member of the Security Council, but a major power. And we heard from the Undersecretary General that there are chemical attacks ongoing as we speak in Syria, with ISIS manufacturing its own chemical weapons, apparently having recruited experts from Saddam Hussein's old chemical program in Iraq. I raised the question with some U.S. government colleagues a few weeks ago of, do we know where all Saddam Hussein's nuclear guys are? Or all of Muammar Gaddafi's nuclear guys? Or all of Bashar Assad's nuclear guys? Interesting.
That was actually a suggestion in one of the student essays.
Was it?
Yeah.
Uh,
Not here, but there were so many others.
Right. I'm not sure what it will take to get people more organized, but it is certainly true that major incidents in many fields are the drivers of institutional innovation and response. But other thoughts?
I think it's a great question. I don't know the answer. It's a great question to ask about how one can mobilize funding. I don't know if the IAEA can be an example or not, but I think it is a worthy topic of focus, just to try to see what the models are for funding and what is a possibility. So that's not very helpful. But I do want to underline what Matt just said. If you are thinking of yourselves as policy entrepreneurs, then it really behooves you, obviously, to try to prevent things from happening. But when things do happen in the domain that you care about, that you be ready to take advantage of the political window that opens and that will close very quickly. So I have a more punctuated equilibrium theory of social change. It says that these external shocks are what create possibilities, because people stop arguing about we should do this, we should not do this, and the whole frame turns to we need to do something. That's a very different political frame for trying to promote change. Now,
Arguably, that's why 1540 happened.
yeah, and I was going to say, and I would say you see a lot of that, and now it doesn't require that we have a new, as I said in my earlier remarks, we've had great progress and we haven't had a nuclear war, right? I mean, we've had nuclear use, but we haven't had nuclear exchange. And so I think it's possible to make progress in the absence of that. But shrewd policy entrepreneurs will prepare themselves for that as a possibility, so that when something does happen, they're able to act swiftly and take advantage of the moment.
Have in your desk the thing that's not politically acceptable today, but would be once the incident happened, and be ready to bring it out.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists and Matt for leading it off and for being with us today on this momentous occasion. We really appreciate everyone being here. But before you go off, I want to read you a statement from this is very apropos from one of the essays. This person wrote, if a cute kitten video clip can reach 1 million viewers, maybe the visual demonstration of the destruction of a major American city can too. So maybe a little bit more technology and putting that forward. But thank you very much. And Wanna